This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Like, this is a real thing. So after the Direct, I saw that a lot of people aren't happy about how the Pokémon Company has revealed their DLC plans for Legend ZA, despite the fact that the game is not even out yet. And in these conversations, it looks like a lot of people are surprised and kind of see this as like the newest gross thing for Pokemon or Nintendo to do. It is true that this is a new thing for Pokemon. They got into the whole DLC game last generation, and Sword and Shield came out November 2019, but the expansion pass wasn't announced until the following January. Then Scarlet and Violet released November 2022, and the DLC wasn't announced until the following August. That was way later. However, announcing DLC before a game's release is not a new thing for Nintendo. Actually, let's take a minute and back up to when this whole expansion pass thing started. Back in the 20-teens, whatever you call them, the game industry was going nuts with DLC, and we were like freaked out by it. Remember those days when the idea of holding back content and selling it later as DLC was like the worst thing big publishers had ever done? Yeah, didn't realize how good we had it, did we? Well, you youngsters can believe it or not, but there was once a time when Nintendo was much more cautious about how they made their money. They were actually very sensitive about certain aspects of their public image. They didn't want to just do what everyone else was doing because what everyone else was doing was making money. They were really hesitant to start making mobile games, for example, even though that market was positively exploding. And similarly, they were really cautious about DLC. They toyed with it a bit on 3DS and Wii U, but it always came out way after the fact. The Switch generation was really when they decided to fully embrace DLC, but they were still careful about it. Their version of DLC was the expansion pass, and that whole idea began with Breath of the Wild. And the Breath of the Wild expansion pass was indeed announced before the release of the actual game. So this has been happening since way back in 2017. Now, we were definitely wary at the time. The idea of a Zelda game getting DLC at all was a little weird, but the game looked so good that we decided to take a wait-and-see approach. The ball was in Nintendo's court. It was up to them to pull this off without it feeling scummy. Now, I think you could probably argue that this expansion pass didn't really offer a lot of content compared to the base game, and locking quality of life features behind a paywall was definitely a little gross. But overall, this expansion pass thing went down fine. It seemed the experiment was a success. And since then, they've announced expansion passes before their respective games several times. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3 each had expansion passes announced a month before their release. Smash Ultimate's first Fighters Pass was announced a month before release. Fire Emblem Engage, same exact thing. There were plenty of Switch games with DLC that was announced after release, but essentially half of these expansion passes were revealed pre-launch. It is, of course, worth noting that just because something has happened before, that doesn't make it right. You could absolutely argue that Nintendo should have never done this, not even once. However, if it has happened, and actually kind of a lot of times, why is it suddenly such a bad thing now? Why is it suddenly ruffling everyone's feathers? What's different? Before we continue, NPRlo here to deliver a word from our sponsor. If you need a website but have no clue how to create one, Squarespace makes it so easy. The intuitive builder lets you add stuff, format, tweak, do basically anything you want without writing so much as a single line of code. You can even start with a template to make it mega easy. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a blog, so I just paste in some text, embed pictures or videos, or even social media posts, schedule everything to automatically publish and push to social media, and I am done. But you can really make any kind of site, storefront, business landing page, content library, and if you ever need some extra juice, Squarespace offers lots of powerful extensions. Also, shout out, as always, to my good friend, the built-in analytics. I love them. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation. Ready-to-cook tortillas. This is the brand I get because it's at Costco, but maybe there are other brands too. But the idea is that these tortillas are uncooked and you just throw them on a pan for a couple minutes. They're not full of preservatives and stabilizers, so they taste incredible. And once you have a truly fresh tortilla, you will never want to go back. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your time. Please enjoy the rest of the video. It is certainly possible that as far as the actual act itself goes, nothing is different. This is simply the state of Nintendo discourse. People are reacting more strongly to each perceived negative thing that Nintendo does. Even if they've done something many, many times before, now the backlash is extra huge. I do believe that this is true, but that's not to say that the backlash is always completely unreasonable. Many things can affect public image, and whatever the reasons for the state of the discourse is what it is. For a variety of reasons, people are feeling a certain way about Nintendo right now. So even if this whole DLC thing is technically an old practice, it is absolutely worth exploring why the response is so different now. And I think in the case of Pokemon, you gotta start by looking specifically at the Pokemon discourse. Trust in the Pokemon Company took a massive hit last generation. There have always been criticisms aimed at them, always little things that miffed the people in the community. Like, of course, that's video games. But on Switch, it almost seemed like they were trying to destroy all their goodwill. There was the whole Dexit controversy, for starters. Then Sword and Shield were so bare bones, clearly rushed out the door. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were disgustingly cheap and lacked any of the content from Platinum for no reason anyone could even guess. And probably worst of all, Scarlet and Violet looked and ran like utter garbage, just trash. To this day, I will go to my grave, in fact, being genuinely surprised that Nintendo allowed those games to be released in that state. Absolutely embarrassing. So after all that, you bet Pokemon announcing DLC before a game's release is gonna raise some red flags. People are clearly still buying these Pokemon games, but the overall trust itself is at an all-time low. Even big Pokemon fans have gotta be cautious, you know? Like, we're all kind of on our guard, waiting to see what scheme Pokemon cooks up next. Oh, you're trying to sell us DLC and the game isn't even out yet? That ain't sitting right. Nope, not coming from you. Again, Zelda did it, but we had reason to trust Zelda. Smash did it, but we had every reason to trust Sakurai. Like who doesn't trust Sakurai? And the game already looked so good. Then with Xenoblade, I don't know if trust was ever an issue, but at the end of the day, both games quite simply delivered. You know, a person will often worry that DLC isn't gonna offer as much value compared to the base game, but Torna was so big, it was released as a standalone title. So both games completely proved themselves. Pokemon, on the other hand, is Pokemon. You want to talk about proving yourself? Well, Pokemon has proven that they are perfectly okay selling products that are far below the usual Nintendo standard of quality. And their mobile games have predictably proven that they are okay pushing moral boundaries in pursuit of money. However, we do have to back up a little. We really can't solely blame Pokemon's reputation here. Again, the whole Nintendo conversation must be considered. The company is under fire right now for plenty of reasons, but mainly it's the pricing. Everything they announce is just so darn expensive. As always, I will argue that the same was basically true last generation, but this time around, the world is somehow even scarier. We're all feeling the economic crunch more than ever. Our money is worth less and less. Everything costs more and more. And we're looking at some of these prices and being like, nah, man, I just can't do this anymore. Video games, they're luxury items, and most people can only spend so much on a luxury item. So again, even if Nintendo has announced DLC early before, now the situation is different. On top of everything else, now the very idea is enough to spook anyone. You look at this barrage of products coming out, and you look at all the prices, and you start to you kind of feel attacked, you know? But the sad thing about the situation is that it's not just Pokemon causing a stink. I mean, that would be great. You know, we're used to that. Pokemon does something gross, we all rant and rave about it for a bit, and then we move on with our lives. That is the natural order of things. I mean, Pokemon gonna Pokemon. What are you gonna do about it? But not this time. This time, Pokemon isn't alone. Oh, DK Bonanza, we expected more from you. But much like in an after-school PSA from the 90s, the poor game has fallen in with the wrong crowd. It's given in to Pokemon's bad influence and started engaging in its own DLC nastiness. When they announced it, on the surface, nothing was wrong. They're like, hey, DK Bonanza's getting some cool DLC. And for a second, it's like, oh yeah, Bonanza DLC. Oh, cool, I was hoping for that. But then, to our surprise, it's a shadow drop. The DLC is done and it's available right now. That's so cool. But then you think about it a little more, and it's like, wait a minute, the game came out 2 months ago. This is a relatively major DLC. It's a whole new area and a new mode that can even carry over to the old areas. Like, this is a real thing. And then you follow the logic and you realize that there's just no possible way they whipped this up in 2 months, which means they were working on it well before the base game even launched. Which naturally brings to mind that idea, that scourge of the gaming industry circa 2013, holding back content to sell it later as an extra. Now, of course, releasing DLC really soon after launch isn't a bad thing in and of itself. Just look at Astrobot. Man, the game launched, and then they just immediately started pumping out DLC at a crazy rate. I don't know if they'll ever stop. Have they stopped? But so far, all of that new content has been totally free. A gift to the fans. DK's DLC is not free though. It's actually a major paid expansion, which means that from we're standing, it does indeed appear that Nintendo has done precisely what they set out not to do when they really began pursuing DLC. The rest of the industry was being real skeezy. We were worried, but nope, not Nintendo. They were gonna do DLC right. They even said as much. They said they wanted to make sure that they brought enough value. These expansion passes were always planned so far in advance that it was clear the teams were focusing on finishing the games and then working on the extra content. That's why it usually took so long to release. But DK, my beloved DK, this does not look good. Now, in total fairness, it is absolutely possible that this is not actually a case of Nintendo withholding content to sell it as an extra later. Insiders have frequently claimed that Nintendo often finishes games completely and then just sits on them for a while until the time to release is right. It's possible that they finished Bonanza well before launch and had a lot of time to work on that DLC after the game was done. But there are also rumors that they delayed the launch of the Switch 2 so they could polish up their games. What about that? Well, maybe they were only polishing Bonanza in the final stretch, and the rest, the bulk of the game, was basically done. And so that whole time, most of them were working on the DLC. If that's what happened, then this isn't so bad, right? That wouldn't seem too skeezy for me. Future Arlo chiming in here, many people have pointed out that the credits for Bonanza's DLC are very different from those of the base game, suggesting that this was largely created by a different team. That would make this a very separate piece of extra content, probably, especially if it's true that the main team finished the game and moved on to something else well before launch. Now back to past Arlo with his rebuttal. See, but we always come back to the public image thing. How does this look? How are we gonna take an announcement with this kind of timing? What are we going to assume? Trust in Nintendo is lower than it's been in a decade. A lot of their customers are feeling nickeled and dimed like crazy. They're just about priced out of the Nintendo ecosystem entirely. What are they going to think when they watch a Nintendo Direct and there are 2 DLC announcements with really shady timing? 2 in one single presentation. It's a news story waiting to happen. It's videos like this waiting to happen. If it's true that it's not as bad as it looks, it's just a misunderstanding, it's a timing issue, then Nintendo has to be pretty tone deaf to not see how these announcements would be received, to not imagine even for a second how this would be seen. I mean, it's stupid. Let's say for a second they did hold back content and they did the whole skeezy DLC thing. Let's say they went full evil mode with this. Even if this was totally intentional, they could have gotten away with it if they had just waited a little longer. They could have shadow dropped it like early next year or something. We would have been none the wiser. But 2 months after launch, it's ridiculous. It's like they genuinely have no idea how their decisions and announcements affect us. They have no barometer for what will be seen as yet another scummy Nintendo move. And obviously, this is really just a reflection of the greater problem. They can't just keep ignoring this whole PR disaster. They need to be cognizant of what they're doing. They're digging the hole deeper for themselves. If people are now extra sensitive to what Nintendo's doing, it's moves exactly like this that further degrade trust a little bit at a time. And you know, it's not likely that DLC is going to somehow become less important to them this generation. No, they're feeling that economic crunch as well. The yen is weak, so all their money is worth less. Tariffs are cutting severely into their profits, and they've got an army of investors on their backs pressuring them to keep the Switch gravy train rolling. No, I see a whole lot more DLC in Nintendo's future. Maybe even more than ever. So if they're gonna keep acting this foolishly, keep being this blind to how their customers perceive them, they're gonna have a big problem. They're just gonna dig that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. The discourse is already positively toxic right now. The whole conversation is dominated by the Nintendo is evil now story. That's only gonna get worse if they don't start being careful. We accepted the idea of DLC in Nintendo games under the condition that they wouldn't treat DLC like the rest of the industry did. And we just want them to hold up their end of the bargain, you know? They've walked that razor's edge for an entire generation, and things have been okay for the most part, but they're starting to wobble a little bit, and it's a little bit scary. But hopefully this was all a fluke. They're not gonna start withholding content from their games and selling us to it later. It was just a timing issue, not gonna happen again, and we can all go back to being mad about real things, like how the new Kirby amiibo are 50 stinking